So picture this. You're a hunter-gatherer in what we now call Turkey, roughly 12,000 years ago. You haven't invented farming yet. You haven't built cities. Heck, you're still figuring out that putting seeds in the ground makes food show up later. But somehow you and your buddies are moving 40-ton stone pillars across the landscape and carving intricate artwork into them that would make modern sculptors sweat. Welcome to Mystique History, where today we're diving into Göbekli Tepe, the archaeological site that basically walked up to everything we thought we knew about human civilization and said, "Hold my beer." Because here's the thing that keeps archaeologists up at night. This place wasn't supposed to exist, not for another 6,000 years, not until humans had figured out agriculture, villages, pottery, all that good stuff. But Göbekli Tepe said, nah, and decided to rewrite the entire timeline of human development. And then, it gets weirder. After spending what must have been centuries building this massive complex, these ancient people deliberately buried the whole thing, just covered it up with dirt, like hiding evidence, like they were worried someone might find it. And for 11,000 years, it stayed hidden under a hill in southeastern Turkey, keeping its secrets. Let's talk about what this place actually is, because calling it a temple doesn't quite capture the scale of what we're dealing with here. Imagine the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Now imagine it's made of carefully arranged stone circles, each one featuring pillars taller than a two-story building, weighing as much as a loaded semi-truck. That's closer to what we're looking at. The site covers about 22 acres of Stone Age architecture that predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years, predates the pyramids by 7,000 years. And here's the kicker: predates agriculture. These people built this before they figured out farming. Think about that for a second. Our entire understanding of civilization went like this. First you farm, then you settle down, then you get organized, then you build monuments. Göbekli Tepe said, what if we did all that backwards? And then it just did. The main structures are these massive circular arrangements, and at the center of each circle stand these T-shaped limestone pillars. Now, when I say T-shaped, I don't mean like a casual T you draw on paper. These things are massive, precisely carved and covered in reliefs of animals: foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, snakes. It's like a prehistoric zoo got frozen in stone. And the craftsmanship? Museum quality. We're talking about people who supposedly were still living in caves, creating artwork that wouldn't look out of place in a modern sculpture garden. But here's where it gets really interesting. The pillars aren't just decorated randomly. There's intention here, pattern. Some of them have arms carved at their sides, hands positioned carefully across their, well, where a stomach would be. These aren't just stones, they're anthropomorphic. They represent something, someone. And around them, the animal carvings seem to tell stories we can't quite read yet. Now, conventional archaeology had this neat little timeline worked out. Humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers. Then, around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, someone figured out you could plant seeds and grow crops. Agriculture happened. This led to permanent settlements. Settlements led to surplus food. Surplus led to specialization. Specialization led to organized religion and monumental architecture. Nice, clean, linear progression. Makes sense, right? Göbekli Tepe basically threw that timeline in a blender and hit puree. This site was built around 9600 BCE. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 11,600 years ago. The people who built this were contemporary with the end of the last ice age. Woolly mammoths were still hanging out in some parts of the world, and these supposedly primitive hunter-gatherers were organizing labor forces, developing engineering techniques, creating artistic traditions, and building something that required serious long-term planning and cooperation. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who really put Göbekli Tepe on the map when he started excavations in the 1990s, had this theory that completely flipped everything on its head. He suggested that maybe, just maybe, religion came first. Maybe the need to gather for ritual purposes actually drove people to develop agriculture, not the other way around. Think about it. You've got hundreds, maybe thousands of people coming together for ceremonies at this site. They need to be fed. Suddenly, hunting and gathering isn't cutting it anymore. You need a more reliable food source, so you invent farming to support your religious gatherings. It's like if Coachella accidentally invented modern agriculture, except, 11,000 years ago and with way more stone pillars. The location itself is fascinating. It sits on a limestone plateau in what's now southeastern Turkey, near the modern city of Şanlıurfa. The locals actually knew about the hill for generations. They called it Potbelly Hill because of its rounded shape, but nobody realized what was underneath until the 1960s, and even then, the real excavations didn't start until 1995. And here's something that'll blow your mind. After nearly 3 decades of excavation, archaeologists estimate they've uncovered maybe 5% of the site. 5%. There are at least 20 stone circles identified through ground-penetrating radar, and only a handful have been excavated. The rest are still underground, waiting. What other secrets are buried under that hill? What other carvings, what other structures, what other messages from our ancestors are still hidden? Speaking of messages, let's talk about what's actually carved on these pillars, because this is where things get cosmically weird. The animals aren't random. They're specific, deliberate, and they seem to represent something beyond just, hey, look, a cool scorpion. There are theories, lots of theories. Some researchers think the carvings might represent constellations, ancient astronomical knowledge encoded in stone. Others think they might be totemic symbols for different groups or clans who gathered there. Still others believe they're narrative scenes, telling stories from mythology we've lost to time. One pillar, known as the vulture stone, has gotten particular attention. It shows a vulture, a scorpion, and various other symbols that some researchers claim might depict a comet strike that happened around 10,950 BCE. If true, that would make it one of the oldest records of a cosmic event in human history. Basically, ancient breaking news carved in limestone. Comet nearly ends world, film at 11. Except the film is a rock and it lasted 11,000 years. But here's the thing about all these theories. We don't really know. We're looking at symbolic language from a culture so ancient, so removed from anything we understand, that we're basically playing the world's hardest game of charades with people who've been gone for 100 centuries. It's humbling, really. All our technology, all our knowledge, and we still can't quite crack the code these Stone Age people left for us. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the lack of elephants or anything domestic. One of the weirdest things about Göbekli Tepe is what's not there. No evidence of permanent habitation, no houses, no cooking hearths, no trash pits full of broken pottery and discarded food scraps. This wasn't a city. This wasn't even really a village. This was purely a ritual center. People came here for ceremonies, for gatherings, for something sacred, and then they left. Imagine building a structure the size of a football field, spending decades on it, making pilgrimages there regularly, and never actually living there. It's like if the Vatican was built before Rome existed, and nobody lived in Vatican City, they just showed up for Mass and then went back to their caves. The sheer labor involved is staggering, moving those 40-ton pillars with Stone Age technology. We're talking about hundreds of people working in coordination, and they did this multiple times for multiple circles. The organization required, it challenges everything we thought we knew about hunter-gatherer societies. These weren't supposed to be people who could coordinate large-scale projects. These were supposed to be small, mobile bands following game and gathering plants. But clearly, somebody forgot to tell them that. And then there's the food situation. Analysis of animal bones found at the site shows massive amounts of gazelle remains, like feast-level amounts. Thousands of people gathering, feasting, celebrating something. What were they celebrating? What brought them together? What belief system, what cosmology, what understanding of the universe did these people have that made them say, "You know what we need? 40-ton stone pillars arranged in circles with carved animals on them." Here's where it gets really wild when we start comparing this to religious traditions that came thousands of years later. Most major religious texts place the beginning of human civilization around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. The biblical timeline, for instance, has creation happening roughly 6,000 years ago, depending on whose calculations you use. But Göbekli Tepe was already ancient by then, already buried, already forgotten. This creates some fascinating questions. Not to say anyone's beliefs are right or wrong, but it does make you wonder about the stories we tell ourselves about where we came from. Because there were clearly sophisticated spiritual traditions happening way before the time frames most formal religions discuss. These people at Göbekli Tepe were contemplating the cosmos, creating sacred spaces, developing complex symbolic systems. And they were doing it 6,000 years before we thought civilization even started. Think about it like this. If Göbekli Tepe was a person and the Great Pyramid of Giza was their kid, that kid would be in their 70s when Jesus was born. That's how much older this site is than what we traditionally think of as ancient history. It's ancient to the ancients. It's so old that when the first cities were being built in Mesopotamia, Göbekli Tepe had already been buried and forgotten for thousands of years. Now maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, cool rocks, weird timeline, but why does this matter? Well, buckle up, because this is where we get into the philosophy of it all. Every culture has origin stories. Every religion has narratives about when things began, how civilization started, what the first humans were like. And for a long time, those narratives kind of fit with what archaeology was telling us. Civilization started in Mesopotamia around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Cities, writing, organized religion, all that good stuff. The timelines roughly matched up. But Göbekli Tepe is like, what if there's a whole chapter of the human story we forgot about? What if sophisticated spiritual thought, complex societies, monumental architecture, what if all that is way older than our cultural memories can reach? It's like finding out your family has this whole other history nobody bothered to mention at Thanksgiving. And this brings us to arguably the biggest mystery of Göbekli Tepe. After all that work, after all those years, after building something that must have been central to their entire worldview, they buried it. Intentionally, carefully. They filled in the circles with tons and tons of dirt and debris. They didn't just abandon it. They didn't let it fall into ruin. They actively, deliberately buried it. Why would you do that? Why would you hide something you'd worked so hard to create? There are theories, of course. Maybe there was a religious shift, a new belief system that required the old one to be literally buried. Maybe they were protecting it from something. Maybe it was part of the ritual itself. Build the temple, use the temple, bury the temple, start over. Rinse and repeat for generations. Some researchers think each circle might have been used for a generation or two, and then ceremonially closed by filling it in and building a new one. It's like planned obsolescence, but for temples. Sorry, folks, this stone circle is from last season. We're all about that new circle energy now. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. What if they were hiding it from us? What if they knew something was coming? Some change, some shift, some event. And they wanted to preserve this knowledge for whoever came after. What if Göbekli Tepe is literally a time capsule, and we're only now beginning to read the message? Okay, I know that sounds like I'm about to sell you a conspiracy documentary, but stick with me here. These people clearly had sophisticated knowledge. They understood engineering, astronomy, art, organization. They were tracking celestial events, recording them in stone. They gathered in huge numbers for ceremonies. And then, at some point, this entire tradition just stopped. The last circles at Göbekli Tepe were buried around 8,000 BCE. And then silence, The knowledge didn't seem to transfer to the later civilizations in the region, at least not in any obvious way. It's like if Silicon Valley just decided to bury all the tech companies one day and everyone went back to farming. And then, thousands of years later, someone dug it up and was like, wait, they had what in 2025? The relationship between Göbekli Tepe and later religious traditions is complicated. You can see some symbolic continuity. The emphasis on sacred animals, for instance, shows up in later Mesopotamian religions. The concept of sacred mountains or elevated ritual spaces echoes through various traditions. But it's not a straight line. It's more like these early spiritual ideas went underground, literally in this case, and then resurfaced in different forms thousands of years later. And this raises uncomfortable questions for rigid historical narratives. If humans were capable of this level of sophistication 1,600 years ago, what else were they capable of? What other knowledge did they have that didn't survive? How many other Göbekli Tepes are still buried out there, waiting to be found, ready to rewrite the textbooks again? Now, I'm not here to tell anyone what to believe about their faith. That's personal. That's sacred. But I am here to say that Göbekli Tepe proves that human spiritual thought is way, way older than we gave it credit for. Our ancestors weren't sitting in caves waiting for divine revelation to kickstart civilization. They were already contemplating the universe, already creating meaning, already building cathedrals, just in stone instead of script. The impact this has on how we understand religious development is huge. It suggests that the impulse toward the sacred, toward creating meaning, toward gathering in community for ritual purposes, that's not a product of civilization. That's not something that emerged after we figured out farming and cities. It might be the other way around. The sacred might be fundamental to who we are as humans. So fundamental that we built temples before we built houses. Let me throw another mind bender at you. Göbekli Tepe is part of what archaeologists now call the Neolithic Revolution, but it's showing us that this revolution was way more complex than we thought. It wasn't just a simple progression from hunting to farming. There was this period, thousands of years long, where people were experimenting with settlement, with architecture, with social organization, with spiritual expression, all before agriculture became widespread. And Göbekli Tepe isn't alone anymore. Since its discovery, other similar sites have been found in the region. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuan Tepesi, Sayburç. It's like once we knew what to look for, they started popping up everywhere. There was an entire culture, an entire tradition of building these stone complexes, and we had no idea. It was a civilization hiding in plain sight, buried under hills we'd walked past for thousands of years. This network of sites suggests something even bigger. This wasn't one random group of overachieving hunter-gatherers. This was a widespread tradition, covering a large geographic area, lasting for millennia. There were trade routes, shared symbolic systems, coordinated efforts. This was, in every meaningful sense, a civilization. It just doesn't look like what we expected a civilization to look like. And that's the beautiful, frustrating thing about Göbekli Tepe. It doesn't fit our categories. It doesn't play by our rules. It's too sophisticated to be primitive, but too early to be civilized. It exists in this liminal space, challenging us to rethink everything. The carvings, the symbols, the astronomical alignments, they all point to a people who were deeply engaged with understanding their place in the cosmos. They were asking the big questions. Where do we come from? What happens when our stories end? What are those lights in the sky? How should we live? What is sacred? These aren't new questions. Humans have been asking them for at least 12,000 years, probably longer. And that's what really gets me about comparing Göbekli Tepe to later religious traditions. The questions are the same. The impulse is the same. That human need to find meaning, to connect with something larger than ourselves, to mark the sacred and separate it from the mundane. That's timeless. What changes are the answers we give, the stories we tell, the structures we build. But here's something truly fascinating. Some of the symbolism at Göbekli Tepe does seem to echo later religious motifs. The serpent imagery, for instance. Serpents show up in almost every major religious tradition. Eden, obviously, but also in Hindu traditions, Buddhist imagery, Mesoamerican religions, ancient Egyptian mythology. Were these separate developments? Or is there some dim cultural memory of these earlier traditions filtering down through the millennia? Or take the concept of sacred pillars. Stone pillars as markers of the divine show up everywhere. Think of the pillar of fire in Exodus, the standing stones in Celtic traditions, the lingam in Hindu practice. Göbekli Tepe has these massive stone pillars as its central feature. Coincidence? Convergent symbolism? Or are we looking at the ancestor of a tradition that spread across the world? Now, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying Göbekli Tepe disproves any particular religion. That's not what this is about. What I am saying is that it proves human spiritual thought is way older and way more complex than any single tradition's historical narrative accounts for. There's a vast landscape of human spiritual experience that existed before recorded history, before written texts, before the religious traditions we know today. And maybe that's actually a beautiful thing. Maybe it means that the human impulse toward the sacred is so fundamental, so ancient, so deep in who we are, that we've been building temples since before we built cities. We've been asking the big questions since before we could write them down. We've been seeking connection with the cosmos since we first looked up at the stars and wondered. The deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe takes on new meaning in this context. Maybe they weren't hiding it from us. Maybe they were preserving it for us. Maybe they knew somehow that future generations would need evidence that humans have always been seekers, always been builders, always been dreamers reaching for something beyond the immediate and the material. There's something poetic about that. The idea that 11,000 years ago, people gathered under the same stars we see, asked the same questions we ask, and left us a message carved in stone that says, "We were here. We wondered. We created. We tried to understand." And now, after all those millennia, we're finally reading that message. We're finally understanding that our story goes back way further than we thought. That the development of human consciousness, human society, human spirituality, it's not a neat linear progression. It's messy, it's complicated, it's full of false starts and forgotten traditions and buried secrets. But it's also beautiful, because Göbekli Tepe proves that humans have always been more than just survival. We've always been meaning makers, we've always been artists, we've always looked at the universe and tried to figure out our place in it. So what does all this mean for how we understand religious history? Well, it means we need to be humble. It means our narratives are always incomplete. It means there's always more to discover, always another layer to uncover, always another hill that might turn out to be hiding a 12,000-year-old temple complex. It means that when religious texts talk about the beginning of things, they're talking about the beginning of those particular traditions, those particular narratives. But the human story goes back further. The spiritual story goes back further. And that doesn't diminish the later traditions. It enriches them. It shows that they're part of a much longer, much deeper human journey. Göbekli Tepe is still being excavated, still being studied, still revealing secrets. Every field season brings new discoveries, new carvings, new mysteries. And remember, we've only uncovered about 5% of it. 95% is still underground, still waiting, still holding whatever messages those ancient people encoded in stone. What will we find in the next decade, the next century? What other sites are still hidden, still waiting for some curious archaeologist to look at a hill and think, "I wonder what's under there"? How many more chapters of the human story are still buried, still waiting to be read? And that's why this matters. That's why Göbekli Tepe is more than just cool rocks in Turkey. It's a reminder that we don't know everything, that our ancestors were smarter, more sophisticated, more spiritually engaged than we gave them credit for. That human civilization is older and stranger and more wonderful than we imagined. It's a message from the deep past that says, "You think you've got us figured out? Think again." And honestly, I love that. I love the humility it requires. I love the wonder it inspires. I love the fact that after all our progress, all our technology, all our knowledge, we're still surprised by what our ancestors left behind. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Göbekli Tepe isn't just an archaeological site. It's a mirror held up to all our assumptions about who we are and where we came from. It's a question mark inserted into every timeline we thought we understood. And it's a gift from people who lived 12,000 years ago, who wanted to leave something behind that would last, that would speak, that would make us wonder. They succeeded. Boy, did they succeed. Because here we are 11,000 years later, still trying to decode their message, still marveling at what they built, still asking the same questions they asked. What did they believe? What did they see when they looked at the stars? What stories did they tell around fires that no longer burn? What songs did they sing that no ear will ever hear again? What drove them to move mountains of stone, to carve symbols we can't quite read, to gather in their thousands for rituals we can't quite imagine? We may never know all the answers, but the fact that we're asking the questions, that's what connects us to them across the vast gulf of time. We're all still looking up at the same stars, still wondering what it all means, still trying to build something that will last. And if you've stuck with me this far through this journey into the deep past, hey, maybe hit that subscribe button and join us here at Mystique History for more dives into the mysteries that make us question everything we thought we knew. Drop a comment below and tell me, what do you think those ancient people were trying to tell us? What message did they encode in those stones? And what other secrets do you think are still buried out there waiting for us to find them? Because here's the truth, Göbekli Tepe changed archaeology. It changed our understanding of human history. It changed the timeline of civilization itself. And it's still changing, still evolving, still revealing new secrets. This isn't a closed case. This is an ongoing conversation between us and our most distant ancestors. And honestly, I can't wait to see what they tell us next.